One, two, three, four. Pedagogy a go-go. Pedagogy go-go-go. Hello and welcome to Pedagogy a Go-Go, a podcast about college faculty sharing what happens in their classrooms and why. This is Season 4, Episode 2, Teaching with Grace and Leeway, and we are your hosts, Gina Turner and Tom O'Connor. Happy May, Tom.
Happy May, Gina. How are you doing?
I'm very excited to be in the middle of finishing up the finals week. I'm waiting for my final assignments to come in so that I can calculate those final grades and then be free for the summer.
Jeff was asking me if I was tired, and I was like, "Oh, yes, I am." And then I realized why I'm so tired, because it's the end of the semester, and I'm getting ready to crash.
We made it. We survived in the midst of continuing, transition and uncertainty, and who knows what the fall will bring as well.
Are you teaching this summer?
No, I'm not teaching this summer, which again is a little unusual because I usually teach at my alma mater. I've been teaching for them one class a year since I graduated, and usually it's in the summer. But of course, with everything going on now, they've postponed that class, so I'll be teaching that in the fall. So
now, is that the new school or?
Yeah, so that's at the new school. Cool. Yeah. So I got to find something to do with myself to keep myself out of trouble this summer.
Yeah, I'm in a new norm. I didn't get to mention this last episode, but I took on a new position at Northampton Community College. So whereas, in the past I was, assistant academic dean at our Monroe campus, I'm in a new role as director of prior learning assessment, which is a mouthful, but it's worth remarking on briefly just because it's a really cool new gig. Basically, I'm working with students from veterans to non-traditional students to dual enrolled students, helping them, earn credit for the work that they're doing. So, top of mind for me recently has been allying and partnering with faculty who are willing to kind of help me assess student work, in different ways, and expand pathways, to NCC for students. It's rewarding work. It's very cool to get to work with a current or veteran member of any of our armed forces and simply say, the service you provided to our country has amazing value, and we as a college value it. Let me help you, and let's look over everything you've done and get you started on your college career. So it's been a crazy transition. It'll be interesting to see what this summer looks like. I know it's going to be different than last summer, though.
Yeah, well, that is really important work that you're doing, Tom, because it speaks to, I think, many of the things we're learning having gone through this pandemic, which is a lot more openness around what constitutes academic achievement, what constitutes, I guess, demonstrating your knowledge, your competence around different academic areas and translating that into academic credits. And I think that's, I think those are positive moves that we're making, right? It goes to the idea that it's not just sitting down and memorizing a textbook and then regurgitating it on a test at the end of a semester.
That's exactly right. So it's a brave new world, but I'm excited to be a part of that here at NCC.
Yeah.
But more important than my role, though, is our guest today, professor of biology here at Northampton Community College, Sonia Massie. I'm so excited to get a chance to talk to her. She came in actually maybe a year and a half after I did at the college. I think she's in her fifth year here at Northampton Community College. She teaches at our Monroe campus. She's also been a real leader teaching online for us, and especially as we pivoted into the pandemic. She brings experience teaching at community colleges and colleges in New Orleans, in Florida, in southern New Jersey before her time here. She's an Atlantic City native, and I'm sure, as we'll find out during our conversation, just a truly remarkable professor and human being. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Yes, Sonia is a great colleague, and I've had the opportunity to work with her on several committees and caucuses and projects, and so I know we're going to have a great conversation.
Can't wait.
If you had just one word to describe yourself as a teacher, what would it be?
as much as giant crabs and allergies are exciting, uh, Sonia, it is so wonderful to have you here on the Pedagogy Go Go podcast with us. You may not know this, but I've wanted to have you on for a long time. But I'm secretly glad that we waited, because you've been here at NCC. You're in your 5th year, and I realized that over half that time you've been teaching here during a pandemic, and what that experience must be like to kind of just have your feet under you, and then the world pulls the rug out from it. And so, like, I'm going to be picking your brain later about what that experience has been, but it made me just want to have you on the podcast more, because I hope I make you embarrassed in a good way right now, just because in a moment where there was so much uncertainty, and so much uncertainty lived in the sciences in which you teach about how are we going to do this remote, you positioned yourself as such a leader and mentor to other faculty during that change in the move to remote and online. And I was working closely with you, because at that time I was working as an assistant dean at the Monroe campus. And I just want to say right now how grateful I am for everything that you did during that time, and how many people you helped. So thank you from the bottom of my heart.
I'm touched. I didn't even know I did that.
So, but for our audience, no, I will get into ways exactly how you did that later. But for our audience, can you tell us what classes do you teach here at NCC, and what is it about your classes that make you excited every day to come in and teach them?
So I primarily teach microbiology for allied health. The students in that class usually are nursing intent. They're hoping to get into our nursing program. And there's usually a few each semester that are going into other allied health programs. And I'll get back to that, because that is the main class that I teach. And it's my beloved class, because my degree is Master's in Microbiology and Immunology. But I also have taught the majors version for like science majors, microbiology. I've taught here at NCC genetics for majors and genetics for non-majors. And then essentials of biology class and anatomy and physiology, all of that good stuff. But my favorite is microbiology for allied health. And I think, so it's twofold why I love it. One is that microbiology fascinates me. And I'm assuming that now, coming out of a pandemic, it fascinates everyone. And the other part is that my students are going into allied health fields. And I think that they view microbiology the way I do, or at least there is the potential for me to get them to be as fascinated by it as I am, because they're going into fields where they actually need to know the content of the course, because they are going to be working with patients.
Do you feel like you have had any pushback on the science of the pandemic? And I mean, not to kind of go there already, but do you feel like there has been any, I mean, I guess I'll use the word politicizing of your discipline in these last 2 years?
Of course. So microbiologists and immunologists go to school for a long time, right? They get master's degrees, they get PhDs, and then everyone believes, Buddy, who made a YouTube channel to talk trash against the CDC. If there's a real Buddy, I'm not referring to a real person. I'm just saying, just a name. So absolutely. I mean, it takes a while to really grasp viruses. Microbiology in general, but especially viruses. Viruses are bizarre. They're alive when they're in us, but they're not alive when they're not in us. They make no sense. I tell my students they're like aliens from outer space. They don't fit with life on Earth, and yet they wreak havoc with life on Earth. And so for the scientists to have been so, I don't know, denigrated, and people didn't believe them and said horrible things about the motives. It was definitely politicized. And I will say, just personally, because people know that this is my field, and like on social media, I would post trying to be a voice of reason, explaining things, like even from the beginning of the pandemic. And so I've had people contact me privately to ask, like, my husband and I are debating whether we should get the vaccine, and we wanted to hear your input on it, different things. Like a former student of mine who is an elementary school teacher wanting some input about masks because she teaches in Florida where they refuse to let the students wear masks, like little things like that. But definitely you get the pushback, like you're saying. Just the other day, somebody was saying, like, don't get any vaccines. Don't ever get vaccines. God is your vaccine. I'm like, God gave us medical advancements, so I'm getting my vaccines. I was like, we can talk later. I'm a microbiologist.
Yeah, God may be a lot of people's co-pilot, but I don't see them taking their hands off the wheel in the car. So
Right. Well, it's funny because, I have a very strong faith. I have a very strong faith in God, and my faith tells me that God provided me with the vaccine. You understand? God made humans that are intelligent, that can test things out, and this works, that doesn't work. And so I feel like, that's definitely not a good excuse that we're going to pray our way out of the pandemic. That doesn't make sense.
Can I ask a quick question
Sure.
about, Gina kind of led the way here, I think, in talking about politicization in this moment of time and the added stress that brings into the classroom. But I'm thinking for the last 2+ years, you said teaching in allied health, you mentioned nursing intent students, and the intent is the key word there, because I know what a pressure cooker that classroom can be for the stress that those students are under, both because they're they're trying to get into an incredibly competitive program with very limited seats. But importantly, many of these people are already working in the healthcare industry in some way during the pandemic. And then, I'm going to throw this out there. Microbiology is not an easy class. Students were stressed about that class pre-pandemic, and now they're learning in that class in many cases a fully remote environment. When you add all those stresses on top of one another, how do you manage that in your classroom?
So I could probably fill the rest of the podcast just talking about this. So can we go back to when everything shut down?
Yeah.
Please.
So during that semester, I was teaching microbiology and genetics. And I let my students decide whether we were going to keep meeting to have lectures live. Only one class opted to do that. And there were about 21 students in that class, and about 7 or 8 of them would consistently come to the lectures. And we were doing on Blackboard Collaborate.
Mm-hmm.
And so much like many of my colleagues experienced, I was teaching to like one person and a bunch of squares with a name in it kind of thing, which was fine. But my teaching style is very interactive. I'm asking questions. People are telling stories. Like you mentioned, Tom, many of my students are already working in healthcare, whether that's a receptionist at a doctor's office, an LPN at a hospital, medical assistants, CNAs, like they are in healthcare. So one of the reasons why many of my students could not come for the live lecture was that their hours changed. When the pandemic hit, they were now at the hospital for much longer stretches of time. So I had been teaching, I've been teaching online courses since maybe 2002.
Mm-hmm.
So I have experience with, arranging Blackboard very methodically, making sure they could find everything they need, putting in a variety of assessments, quizzes, exams, different kinds of assignments, discussion board. And I had never, I hope I don't get in trouble with anybody for this, but never have I ever in my whole entire teaching career made a lecture recording for my students.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with you.
I never provided them with lecture recordings. I was not doing, during the pandemic, I was not doing any Zoom or Blackboard Collaborate because of what I experienced that semester that we shut down. My students, especially because they're in healthcare, my students, to me, they were no longer candidates for being at a place at a certain time.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
There are plenty of other professors who have made recordings of their lectures, and so I link those in um, on Blackboard so that the students who do need to hear a lecture had it. But I just try to build in so many different things. Like I'll put fun videos. If you ever are on YouTube, look up Amoeba Sisters. They have these cool. They're animated. It's so fun. They're short. They're usually like 5 to 10 minutes. Because I know some students might need that. There's PowerPoints to click through with no voiceover. I just try to put different formats of ways that the students could learn it. But so one other thing I want to say on this subject is that because my students work in healthcare, when the time came for us to start moving back on campus, I actually opted to continue teaching online as long as possible because twofold. Number one, I never know when my students, they might sign up for a class at a certain time, but if their schedules had to shift again because their ward was overrun with COVID patients, that's not going to be beneficial to them. And then number two, I have some health risks that put me in like the high risk category for COVID complications. And teaching any class of students gives you risk, but teaching a class where half or more of them work in hospitals
Oh,
you understand, like that was a little bit higher of an exposure than I wanted to take. So this semester was my first time with a couple of classes that were hybrid with the lab in person.
It's great to hear you say that, Sonia, because one thing, like you, I've been teaching it at least somewhat online since 2004. So I was very comfortable teaching classes fully online and fully asynchronous. And, one thing I am pleased about is the validation of that as a teaching methodology because of the pandemic. I think people being forced to find ways to use these learning management systems like Blackboard and to use these video conferencing systems even for things like office hours, right? Adding that in to give your students an opportunity to meet with you in real time. But still, that there's a ton of value in providing multiple ways of exploring the material like you just described, different
Mm-hmm.
videos and activities and PowerPoints that isn't just recording a person standing in front of a room and then plopping that recording into Blackboard, which is not to devalue lectures. But I'm just really glad to hear you say that.
Right. Well, something that I appreciate about Northampton Community College is that we did shift to start offering so many modalities. And I know it can be overwhelming for students to even figure out, even in my classes where when you look on the schedule, it says online, it says like from 0 o'clock to 0 o'clock, there's no meeting time. And they look at my syllabus and they see my office hours and they're like, okay, is this the time that I have to log in for class? I'm like, no, that's my optional office hours. You never have to log in for class. But if it's a student who does need that live lecture, they can take someone else is offering a section like that where it's online, but you have a lecture, and then someone else is offering a hybrid class, right? So I love that we are giving our students so many options because some students do need to hear the live lecture. Some students read their textbook and they get it. They never need to go in a classroom.
Yeah,
And
it's
then there's
true.
all the in-betweens.
I began by discussing my gratitude to you personally, Sonia, like with the pivot to the teaching in a pandemic landscape, and you were like, "What are you thanking me for?" Well, I think you just explained what I'm thanking you for in terms of because I mean, and just to be clear, what you are describing is meeting our students where they are, understanding their specific needs, and also understanding that students come to knowledge in different ways and are different types of learners. So you're kind of, in a nutshell, you pretty much laid out the basic principles of universal design, for
Hmm.
learning and how you've been bringing that into your classroom. And in a moment of panic, when people hadn't been teaching online for over a decade, right? You know, you were, I think, at the front saying, we can do this. Let me show you how I'm doing this. Like, let
Right.
me show you how my students are being successful in this moment. And so, like I said, I think you were a real thought leader. But even just in hearing you talk about the stress of that time and how you met it head on, you were this calming presence at a moment of great of great unease. And so anyway, that's where my gratitude came from, because you were always open. If an adjunct needed help, or if another full-time professor was like, I don't know how I'm going to be doing this in this way, you were like, let me show you what I'm doing. And so that's where my gratitude came from. But
I appreciate that.
So,
I think
but
that
I'm going to pivot. Oh yeah, sorry.
I
No,
was
go
just saying,
ahead.
pandemic or otherwise, I'm always willing to help others, and there have been others that have been always willing to help me here at Northampton Community College. So I just feel like that's why I wasn't sure what you were talking about regarding the pandemic, because I feel like that is just our way here.
Well, and specifically yours. And I knew that as soon as you began to talk, it would become incredibly obvious why I admire your teaching style, and just your collegiality in this academic environment. So let me put you on the spot and ask a challenging question. If you had just one word to describe yourself as a teacher, what would it be?
So if I had to, it's hard to pick one word. There's two words that
You
come
can
to mind.
hyphenate. We've let people hyphenate in the past.
Hilarious hyphen passionate. Is that? How about effervescent? Is that
effervescent?
There's no.
Ooh.
Okay, I'm gonna go with that. You
we
like it? I'm going with it.
we began with the sound of the fizz of my seltzer, and we have arrived fully at effervescence.
There you go. Because I want my students to love learning, and not just microbiology or whatever the subject is I'm teaching. I just want them to be as excited as I am about, diseases and oozing sores, and come on, this stuff is fascinating.
I'm reading a book that's set in the plague in England right now, and it is fascinating.
It is.
Can you think of an experience that you've had with a student or multiple students where you've felt like, oh gosh, I really effervesced and I really got them to get passionate about these yucky diseases, or even a time where you have felt challenged by a student's experience or multiple students' experiences?
So, well, the first part I'll just answer briefly. It always pleases me in the comment section of student evaluations when they say that I made microbiology fun. And they'll say, like, she made a hard topic seem easy. I learned, but I had fun doing it. Like, that is like, woo, that just like icing on my cake, gluten-free cake, if you will. But I have to say, and forgive me, I might get a little choked up, but during the pandemic, I made an assignment that was just worth a small amount of points, to give my students a chance to talk about what they were going through with the pandemic. And I don't even remember exactly what questions I asked, but it was just a reflection on, like how things were going. And again, because a lot of my students work in healthcare, I could only read a few at a time because it was so devastating.
Yeah.
These students were working in hospitals and not seeing their families. Sometimes they had to like isolate away from their families for long stretches of time. And God bless them, they were still taking microbiology and whatever else they were taking, and they were making it happen. And I just want to say, like, I mean, everyone has been affected by the pandemic, but our healthcare workers are heroes. And the fact that they, just were able to continue on, adapt, make a way, I am just in awe of them. But definitely my students have had a unique set of challenges during the pandemic. And one huge thing that I take away that I am really like challenging myself to continue doing is my motto during the pandemic was grace and leeway. I wanted to give my students all the grace and leeway, and give myself grace and leeway. We all needed grace and leeway. And the majority of the assignments in my classes, have, weekly deadlines, but their ultimate deadline was literally the last day of classes. The only thing I don't accept late is peer feedback on the discussion board, because no one's going to see it if you post it, the week after or beyond. And I've had students who really needed that, right? Because they're great students. I know you're already a great student if you've made it to if you made it through AMP1 and you're now in micro, like usually they take AMP1 first. That class is like the boot camp of trying to get into allied health fields. So I already know you're studious and you're, motivated and all this stuff, but I mean, life really blindsided a lot of them. So not only are they in hospitals, right, but their aunt might be dying of COVID, and their next door neighbor, like all the same stuff we all went through in the pandemic, except they were also working in hospitals and doctors' offices. And so anytime something was late or they were asking for more time, I would just remind them, like, as stated in the syllabus, the last day of class is the ultimate deadline, and I'll accept it. And I had students really fall behind and still get A's and B's out of the classes because they were able to go back and make it up. And I know that will be more challenging when we're in person for me to accept something way after the fact or let them take an exam the last day of class that they missed the first month of class. But I want to challenge myself to find a way to make that happen because, I mean, in the real world, we can move deadlines. We can readjust and we can adapt. And I want to be able to do that for my students. And I don't think there'll be as much of a need for it, like as much of a widespread need for it. But if I have that one student who, whatever, their grandmother died, they had to travel to another state, they were gone for 2 weeks, the family was traumatized, whatever the case may be, I want to try to continue giving that grace and leeway because we have phenomenal students, but sometimes life gets in the way.
Absolutely. And it gets in the way, not just for the students, but for us as faculty, for all of the other people who are working at the college as well. And I, hearing you say that, I love that grace and leeway, that flexibility that you're bringing to your classroom and to your community of students. Do you ever feel like you were kind of singing the praises of the collegiality here at NCC, and do you ever feel like maybe that butted against other people's perspectives on rigor and, because I love what you said, in the real world, deadlines can change. Oftentimes you hear people say, well, in the real world, you'd get fired if you didn't meet that deadline.
Mm-mm.
But it is true that there is a certain level of grace and leeway in the world as well. Maybe even, hopefully more so after the pandemic. But did you feel like grace and leeway was being granted between colleagues and how that contributed to the feeling of collegiality?
Um, I think so. I mean, I haven't experienced anything to the contrary, and I think I'm not the only one who was allowing for, some flexibility. I am sure that not everyone was, only because I have students that would, or advisees that would let me know that they were having this problem and the teacher said they couldn't take the test late, even though, and it would be like a really big problem, like they were hospitalized or, a death or something like that. So I understand that not everyone is going to give that grace and leeway. I'm just going to say, for me personally, I don't think rigor is not diminished by simply giving students that flexibility.
Amen.
Sure. And I didn't mean for it to be like, well, so-and-so. I wasn't trying to get you to call anyone out, but
I would never anyway.
Right. I know you are a very kind person. The other thing that this leads me to think about too is, you mentioned getting choked up, even reading, a few of your students' assignments, and also it takes a lot of bandwidth to provide that flexibility and that grace. How are you giving yourself that grace? Can you talk a little bit more about, how you're avoiding burnout by maybe giving yourself some of that grace and leeway?
I stopped cleaning my house.
I am giving you a standing ovation for that answer.
Listen, during when we went into lockdown, I think I was in my second quarter of my Doctorate of Education program at Drexel, which is fully online, and my daughter was still a preschooler. So now I was home with a preschooler. So now instead of her room being her playroom, the whole 2-bedroom apartment is her playroom, and I'm home with her with a full-time teaching load, and I was taking 2 classes per quarter at Drexel. And so something had to give, and it was my floors and picking stuff up. But I think so. That is one way that I really have had to give myself grace and leeway. So I'm joking that one day Dr. Massie will clean that apartment.
So Sonia, I cannot give you a magic wand for cleaning your floors, and I don't have a magic wand maybe for the answer to this next question, but so much what you're speaking about, I think, gestures towards it, in the sense that when we talk, I want to be clear, and I'm so glad that Gina doubly underlined this notion of grace and leeway, only because I think that's not just a COVID issue in the COVID classroom. I think that that's importantly in all classrooms, pre and post, God willing, pandemic. For me personally, the last few years have really shaken the way I see higher education, have expanded it in many ways as we've had to explore new avenues. So I'm going to put a magic wand in your hand and ask you if you could change any one thing about the state of higher education right now, in light of everything you're talking about, what would it be?
All right, so this is huge. And the pandemic happening while I was in Drexel's EDD program, those two things like came together to really impact me in that I don't want to ever lecture my students again. And I'm going to have to figure out what that looks like, because in the fall, I do have some on-ground lecture. This will be my first time with an on-ground lecture. So number one, my teachers at Drexel didn't lecture me. They didn't lecture us. We had a Zoom class a couple times this semester. Not even every class, every professor did that. And very little of it was lecture. It was more like conversation, group work, stuff like that. And during the pandemic, I have not been lecturing my students, and they're still doing fine. So I know for years I've been hearing this. We shouldn't be the sage on the stage. We should be the guide on the side. Right. And I have to say that what I had to end up doing for my students during the pandemic and what my Drexel professors did for me, really those two things came together to highlight that I am there to facilitate my students in their learning journey and not just blah, 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 stand at the front of a room and talk at them. And I think especially in the sciences, I hear this like for years, decades, maybe even, people will bring up things like a group project, like different things that, you do in a class, and science teachers are usually of the mindset of, well, I have too much content to cover. And of course, we do have labs where you get to have hands-on and you get to have group work and things like that, and that's fine. But it can be boring for a student to have to sit and hear someone talk about science for an hour and 15 minutes twice a week. And so I want to, maybe experiment with flipped classroom, basically have everything online for my on-ground students that my online students had, the videos and all that. And then let's just talk. And I have to say that on a small scale, I have done this in the past where my students had to find a primary research article on anything related to microbiology, read it, type up a summary, and then we sit in class and we talk about it. They share their summary, and then we always have discussion. And my favorite time, this was before the pandemic, we were in person. I think it took 2.5 class periods to get through all the discussion about these journal articles. And I know that as a science educator, there would be the temptation to feel like, I'm going to have to cut out 2 chapters now, right? Like we just wasted, quote unquote, all that time. But it wasn't, because the articles they were reading were about microbiology. And when there was something relevant relating to, what we were going to discuss, I would, chime in. And I would even say, like, when we get to that, we can just skim through it now because we just talked about it. Right. And so I really, and I know it's not necessarily a one size fits all. Like, I don't know, math, for example, at some point you're going to have to talk at the students, certain things. But I just would love for us to really move away from lecturing in person because it's boring. And I'm sorry, it's boring. And I mean, I've done it, and I'm admitting it's boring. And then like I try to make it as interactive as possible. But the other thing too is like our students, like modern humans, are becoming less likely to want to hear a lecture and more likely to want to talk and interact and construct and collaborate and all that good stuff. So I would like for me and other educators to take heed to that and actually be that guide on the side rather than sage on the stage. We're still important. We still have all the knowledge. We still can feel great about leading the class, but in a different way.
I'm so happy to hear someone from the STEM area talk about a move from both being the sage on the stage and also the fact that, let me frame it this way. There is factual information that a nurse is going to need to know 100%. You want her to know the difference between, I don't know, I'm not a nurse, so I can't think of a good example. But there's factual information that we want our physicians to know. There's factual information, but the way in which factual information becomes sticky, I think is, more and more we're really recognizing is by connecting it to the things that we already know and understand.
Right.
So group discussions and group projects makes that information sticky. And for me in psychology, I feel like their ability to make those connections between the concepts is more important than me drilling the terminology. Understanding the concepts is more important. In my cognitive psychology class, I have my students read a little section from a book by Yuval Harari, who's a historian who's talking about the tools we need for the 21st century and beyond. And all the information's at our fingertips. If you can't, we don't need to have memorized everything like you did in the 18th century for education because we can Google it on our phone. So it's the ability to connect the information and to think creatively and to communicate with each other, I think is so important. And that's really what I'm hearing you saying about, I feel like that is a move that higher education is making.
Can I ask about the flip side of that coin? Because Sonia, I can't tell you how many times, like you said it, the most common thing you hear is my class is crammed with all this knowledge that I have to
Mm-hmm.
cram into my students' heads,
Mm-hmm.
right? I don't have time for any of that. And I think you are very quickly outlining a few paths to that knowledge. And I would ask you actually to share. I mean, so you talked about the primary source article that's summarized, and then the student becomes the teacher, and then the discussion happens around each of those articles is one great example of an assignment that leads people to the desired learning outcomes. What are, just off the top of your head, if you have like other assignments that you're doing in your own classrooms, I think would be, other faculty members would love to hear what they are. And also, like, how are you assessing that your students have reached those learning outcomes? How do you know, and when do you know how to assess that?
Right. So, I mean, I still use traditional quizzes and exams for assessing their learning outcome. And online, I use discussion boards and look at if they're, actually providing the content that I'm asking them for, and then also the peer feedback. But as far as an assignment, there's an assignment that I'm really proud of that I started using a few semesters ago. It was just it started off as something more basic that was just an extra credit assignment, and it evolved into something more detailed. So I was at a conference online during the pandemic, and somebody from another community college was talking about a diverse STEM influencers Google spreadsheet that she had made, and she was sharing it with people, and it's amazing. It's the spreadsheet that has, again, like diverse STEM influencers. So it has the person's name, it has what field they contributed to, and then there's even some links to websites to get more information about the people. And I was like, I need my students to see this. Like, I want my students to use this. So the assignment that I use now in my microbiology for allied health classes, the students have they don't have to pick from that list, but they can at least, look at that list for ideas. If they know someone that's not on the list, that's fine. But they have to research two individuals that are from different STEM fields, right? So I don't want two microbiologists, right? So it might be a computer scientist and a mathematician, or a aerospace engineer and a biologist, that sort of thing. And they need to basically report on the person's life and also their contributions to their field. And I very specifically did not want to make this like an essay or research paper. So I made it a multimedia
Mm.
presentation, because I think that not that I think, I am certain that as much as our students are tech savvy, they, for the most part, don't know how to make things with technology, if that makes sense. I mean, I've been shocked to even find out that some students have never made a basic PowerPoint presentation. So, um, yeah, so I give them suggestions of possibly using YouTube, like make a video, they can make a PowerPoint presentation and present it and record themselves. I have, I have a Padlet is another example that I give them, where they're, Padlet, you're kind of making like a poster presentation. and and so um this is, I mean, it's worth part of their grade, and they post it in the discussion board area so that the others can look at it and give them feedback. And I mean, honestly, for me, the assessment is, I mean, they're assessed on like whether they did what I said, the two different people, different fields, and all like that. But as far as the learning outcomes, like they are, how can I say it? The feedback, I've asked for feedback because it was a new assignment, and I've actually put it in my supplemental questions for my student evaluations to ask them specifically about that assignment. And I'm just so pleased at the fact that they were struck by these diverse STEM influencers that they didn't know existed. So like for me, I don't know. Did I link it to a specific learning outcome? No, but I'm on top of the world because my students now know that there's some Chinese man that did this, and there's some Black woman that did that, and that science is not just a, monogamous field, right? So, and then the fact that I'm having them do things like Padlet or make YouTube videos or even PowerPoint, and they never have done that before. And it should be fun. I mean, it may be challenging, but I would hope that they had fun. Some of them, the feedback was that they really enjoyed it. They had fun doing it. And so, yeah, that's something that I love. And I would love if all of our STEM classes did this, because like I said, this spreadsheet, it literally has people from all fields of STEM. And the teacher, the professor who made this, is open to input, because one of my students, I think, told me about someone, and I emailed her, and she added that person to the spreadsheet. So it's a growing spreadsheet.
Oh, that's great that the student was able to contribute
Mm-hmm.
the information too. And what a fantastic way to address, I mean, honestly, to address the fact that our traditional learning materials don't make a point of finding people who have contributed to these fields from different backgrounds, from underrepresented backgrounds. Now, do
Exactly.
you feel like you've ever had any pushback on the assignment from, or either from this assignment, but it does also make me think about the ways in which, if we're talking about COVID and we're talking about um, disparities in who gets COVID, and disparities across ethnicity and differences in access to healthcare and things like that. I'm not sure how much you get into that necessarily in your classes, but um, are you getting any pushback from people who are, again, I have to be the one who keeps bringing up elephants in the room, but in terms of this idea of, oh, critical race theory, oh, you're forcing us, forcing this down our throats, and we don't, we want to push back against that.
No, I've never had any student like voice concern about why I was doing it. So I will say that I started using this before critical race theory became like a buzz, problematic. I never heard of critical race theory until I took a social justice class at Drexel in a Doctor of Education program. So it's funny to me that, I mean, I am not teaching critical race theory
Right.
to my students. I am just giving them a diverse STEM influencers assignment. But one thing that I want to point out is that the majority of my students are women.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say, I mean, a third to half of my students are from minoritized racial groups. So I think this spreadsheet that's full of women of every color, and there's white women too. White women in STEM is still considered diverse.
Mm-hmm.
You understand, right? So for the most part, I think they're just seeing people that are like them, right? And then
They're
I
seeing
do
themselves, yeah.
right, and that's important. That is so important.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I have had male students also, and I've never had anyone say anything about it. There are males on there too. There's Hispanic males and Asian males on the spreadsheet. So, but no, I've never gotten any pushback about that.
Yeah, I mean, I got a little bit of pushback in my health psychology class when we talked explicitly about COVID and those health disparities. And kind of back to the beginning of our conversation, I had students who just kind of wouldn't accept the data that I was providing to them from the CDC and from, you know, well-sourced news articles. You know, they were sort of you know, kind of stubbornly rejecting the idea that there would be differences in an illness for reasons that we were discussing in the class, right? That there
Right.
are social inequities. So I just wanted to ask that question. Well, you've mentioned your program, your EDD program, and how that's kind of informed your thinking about lecturing. Do you have other experiences either in your program now or at being a student prior to this that you feel like really turned you into the teacher that you are today? Or maybe even a moment when you thought, you know what I really want to do is teach?
Well, both of those questions are going to lead me back to my beloved alma mater. I got my bachelor's degree from Xavier University of Louisiana, which is a historically Black university in New Orleans. And I have to say that, so I've heard people say about Northampton Community College that it's a community college with like a university feel or something like that.
Yeah.
And I have to say that Xavier University of Louisiana is a university that has a community college feel.
Huh.
It's funny because I'll just give you this one example. So I had some health problems my first year there, and much like I try to give grace and leeway to my students, my professors there gave me grace and leeway. So this is my foundation, right? Xavier had a policy called FE. You could fail due to absences. You could have an A and still fail due to absences. And they waived this for me. And my teachers were all very understanding, and they helped me during that year. And one of the things that really like impressed that, you know, like, I don't know, that loving, nurturing, caring environment, there was a teacher who I was familiar with who I had never had. And she saw me in the hall one day, it might have been my sophomore year by then, and she stopped to talk with me, like, how was my health doing? And she was so, you know, like, I don't know how she knew anything about me. You understand what I'm saying? But because other people knew, I mean, her colleagues were my teachers, and I just remember that impacted me because people cared about me, right? And I had an advisor that I remember saying, whatever you do, don't take time off. Don't move back home. Like, even if you just go part-time, like, don't stop, because I don't remember, she quoted some statistic about the likelihood of coming back is, you know, not high, right? So those things really impacted me. When I went to college, I had the intent to go to medical school. My bachelor's is biology pre-med, but because of some health issues, I realized I thought I could survive medical school, but not the residency where they have you working 16 hours straight and people's lives depend on you. I didn't think I could do that. So for a while I wasn't sure what I would do. And I was in my microbiology class at Xavier University. And my professor had a master's degree, and she was working on her her doctorate, and she was there with us teaching, and she was talking about how she was doing research. And I was like, oh, that sounds so interesting to teach and do research. So that was what sparked, like, hey, I could become a teacher. But I will say very briefly, the teaching experiences I had as a graduate student, love them. The research experience is nice. I did it. I don't want to ever do it again. It was boring. You're basically by yourself doing like repetitive motions over and over again, and then it takes over your life. And so, yeah, and I actually started teaching at Delgado Community College in New Orleans while I was still getting my master's degree. And I absolutely just loved it, just the whole community college setting. And I think a part of that is because, like I said, Xavier had that vibe, right? That we are a community. We're going to help you get through this vibe. And
Yeah.
I came to understand later that most universities are not like that. When I was in graduate school at LSU Health Science Center in New Orleans, one of my friends and I were running late for a class. It was the only class we had that was not on site. It was over at the dental school. And I wanted to call the professor and leave him a message to let him know we were running late. And my classmate, this seemed so bizarre to him, because he was saying he went to a large university
Mm.
where essentially the professor wouldn't even know that you weren't there. Everybody was like a number.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that was foreign, because there were like 9 of us. Of course, the professor's going to see we're not there. I want to let him know why we're not going to be on time.
God bless you, Sonia, because you just gave me the piece to something that I've been trying to put together in my head. So I'll just say what it is. I'll get myself in trouble here, because you quoted the old saying that NCC has been saying for probably over a decade now. We describe ourselves as a 2-year school that feels like a 4-year school. And I can't tell you how much I oppose that philosophy in a lot of ways, because no one is more bounded in a nutshell, if you will, than the idea of the 4-year school. And I would much rather NCC's position be the endless possibilities of being a true community college.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Excelsior, example that you gave,
Excelsior is a good way to describe Xavier. Shout out to Stan Lee.
It's what our showrunner Kelly was shouting in the background when you were talking about public-facing student assignments as he was celebrating your assignment. No, but with Xavier, the idea that 4-year schools should be trying to be more like us. Like,
yes.
We have the potential for a flexibility, a different way of being, and truly being a part of a community. And just you framing it that way as exalting this really lovely, historically Black 4-year college in New Orleans. It wasn't New Orleans, right? I know it's in Louisiana.
Yes.
Okay, right? In New Orleans. And, and simply saying what made them great is that they embodied the best aspects of what a community college can be.
Absolutely.
And I think that's our future. I know we're running short on time, so I'm going to lob one more difficult question at you, and then we've got a real easy one for you to end on, and it's this. And I think you've been so open and honest, this probably isn't that difficult question. It's simply, what do you see yourself as being your own biggest struggle as a teacher? And how are you working on growing and changing in that area?
This is going to get me in trouble, because I hate grading, and so the way I'm facing that challenge is by giving myself less things to grade.
Another standing ovation from me, Sonia.
There's a huge article on this in the Chronicle of Higher Education about getting away from getting away from different means of assessment and getting away from all the grading.
In sciences, there are, like Gina was saying, there are facts that the students need to know. And so my students take exams online or in person. The exams are, it's going to be somewhat stringent. You're going to have to memorize a bunch of stuff. And so I still am required to give them exams to make sure that they can remember those terms and definitions, and which disease causes which disease is caused by which pathogen, that sort of thing. But I can do all of those. I usually do that as multiple choice and matching. I will give some essay questions to grade. But yeah, I really don't like grading things. So like for discussion boards, the students have assignments to do, but it's real, like what I have to do to grade it is real basic, because for me, the point is them doing the work and discussing it with each other, right? So
Yep.
yeah, so yeah, I don't know. Should I be challenging myself to do better with grading, or am I good with just keep doing things that don't need
You
to be
keep
graded?
doing what you're doing.
Well, it comes
Yes,
back to
I got
that.
permission.
Yeah, it comes back to that idea of what's going to stick with them. The 72 points they got on this assignment,
Right.
or the interaction they had in a small group discussion of the assignment, right?
Right.
And so I'm with you, Sonia. Maybe I'm getting myself in trouble too. I give points for doing it and not how it was done, and then feedback and discussion in class about what we're doing together. And then obviously there are major, structured with rubric final
Right.
projects,
Right.
presentations, papers, absolutely. But yeah, the small
You're
stuff.
teaching you're teaching your students to become learners,
That's what I
to
want.
embrace the act of learning and acquiring knowledge, and
That's
there is no more valuable tool than that.
that's one of the things I tell them when it comes to like deadline, because my students do, for the most part, they try to keep up with the weekly deadlines. And I've had students say like, I don't think I'm ready. Is it okay if I take it late? And I'm like, as a reminder, as stated in the syllabus, you can take it up to the last day of class. But I tell them like, do not take it if you don't feel like you're ready. I'm more concerned with you learning the material
Mm-hmm.
than I am with the grade that you're going to get.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Exactly. Well, Sonia, this has been so great, and we could continue talking to you forever. But I'm going to ask you our last question, which we ask of every guest, and that is to tell you for you to tell us a non-guilty pleasure
Non
that
guilty.
that maybe your fellow faculty and colleagues don't know about you.
I love watching sci-fi shows. I mean, anything. My all-time favorite is Stargate SG-1, but different ones over the years. Fringe, Dark Matter. I mean, there's so many travelers. It could be about time travel, aliens, whatever. If it's sci-fi, I watch sci-fi so much
Yeah.
that almost, I mean, at least once a week, I have an epic dream that's about alien invasion. Or I could probably, you remember like Amazing Stories or Twilight Zone kind of
Yeah.
thing. I could probably, if I would like dream journal in the morning, I could probably make a series on yeah, like different scenarios of alien invasions. I love watching
Let's
sci-fi
do it together,
shows.
Sonia. This can be our side hustle. I am totally on board.
I just a friend just turned me on to Resident Alien. Have you watched that?
No, okay, I'll
Oh,
have to
Oh,
look it up.
Alan Tudyk from Firefly's in it. He's
Oh, I was gonna mention Firefly.
he's awesome.
it's a really
So
fun show. So I oh good, I gave you
Resident
something to
Alien.
check out.
I'm gonna check it out. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Sonia. This has been great. I always enjoy talking to you, and you are an esteemed colleague at NCC.
Thank
simply
you.
the
Thank you
best, as
all.
Tina Turner would
Oh,
say. Simply the best.
thank you all. What's love got to do with it? As Tina Turner would say.
Everything, everything.
Everything. I agree. Everything. Thank you all for having me.
Pedagogy a go go. Pedagogy go go go.
But I am a sucker for time travel. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I've been plotting this time travel novel,
Yeah. I didn't mention the show, but a show that I got really hooked on was Timeless. So I need to ask
Timeless
her.
was great.
I loved that. I actually watched that show through twice. I got such a kick out of it.
And you saw the final Christmas special, the 2-hour finale,
I sure did.
where they wrapped everything up. Oh, it was so good.
Yeah.
I had I was just thinking of Timeless the other day because Becca and I were watching. Oh, it was a really, really lousy, or I should say mediocre Mick G movie with Reese Witherspoon, Chris Pine, and I forget the other actor's name, called This Means War. And there was like a kind of a small character part. And I'm like, who is that? She looks so familiar. And she had been the lead in Timeless, and it took me a few minutes to place it. So
okay.
we have to make that recommendation to Sonia then.
Yeah.
It was every bit as wonderful talking to as I knew she would be.
Yeah. And her warmth emanates through talking to her today, but I just get that sense that her students must gravitate to her so much, especially given basically her mission statement of grace and leeway. So,
there's a deep well of genuineness and just like almost a humane impulse to be kind of to honor our students as adults in the classroom, to understand the lives that they're coming from and be present for them where they are and how they're learning.
yeah.
And just as she, even as she became emotional, you can't listen to Sonia talk about her experiences with students, talk about her experiences in the classroom, whether it's in person or online, and not come away going, my gosh, she cares so much. And you just know how tremendous she is in the classroom. I'm
Yeah.
like,
Especially and I should say in conjunction with her passion and love of her subject matter and her attention to, you know, to detail and to wanting to make sure her students are getting the material um, with rigor. We used that word in the conversation, and so I really appreciate hearing someone who feels that priority to have both at the same time, to have that grace, but to also have that rigor, and that they're not diametrically opposed from each other.
No, I found it remarkable that I kind of asked for an assignment demonstrating kind of universal design for learners, like a kind of lecture-free classroom. And not only did she give me this amazing assignment, but essentially it was a masterclass on how to draw issues related to diversity, equity, inclusion into the STEM classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I didn't anticipate that. And once it was there, I'm like, what a gift. And I know that, we're going to put some of the information that she shared with us up on the podcast website. And I encourage our listeners to check it out and to, as I say, steal freely from the great ideas of others in that case and draw that into your own classrooms.
Yeah, it's true that assignment was such a Venn diagram of teaching diversity, student engagement, giving the students their own agency about what they choose to focus on for an assignment, and also what she touched on in terms of assessment, right? That she's not necessarily grading them on what they've done, but just simply the fact that she's giving them this opportunity to explore and to become learners and to learn how to love learning.
Well, and
So,
it's so, I began this podcast talking about my new role here at NCC, and that's top of mind. That's exactly
mhm,
what I'm thinking about, is how do we assess learning, especially if that knowledge has been acquired in a non-traditional environment,
mhm,
not your kind of straightforward top-down teacher, pouring the knowledge into the student's classroom and
mhm.
not just memorizing a number of terms. And it's led to really philosophical conversations. And I mentioned about faculty who are thought leaders and real allies and partners in that work. And Sonia's is top of the list.
Yeah, it's great. Well, I'm sad that is our last conversation of the semester, but at least we got to have two really fun, engaging conversations with Dr. Kara McClintock Walsh, and of course with Professor Sonia Massie this time. So,
No, without question. And as this episode lands at the beginning of all of our listeners' summers, let me just take a second to say, enjoy it. Take time for yourself where you can. And we look forward to talking again really soon.
yep, have a restorative and fun summer and see you in the fall.
Hey, thanks for listening to Pedagogy A Go-Go, recorded in the Center for Teaching, Learning, and Technology at Northampton Community College in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Our podcast daydreamer/showrunner is Kelly Allen, and Pedagogy A Go-Go is produced by Jeff Armstrong. If you've got any questions, please send them to pedagogyagogo@gmail.com. Our social media handle is at pedagogyagogo, and you can stop by our website at www.pedagogyagogo.com for copies of podcast transcripts, guest assignments, and other useful tidbits. Keep in mind there are no hyphens or dots in any of the above web addresses. Until next time, this is Gina and Tom saying, take care and teach well.